I'd like to talk today about being too hot and too cold in homes, so thermal comfort, really also about thermal stress and how that relates to energy. I would like to quickly run over why do we care about this, and then I'd like to get into the Get Bill Smart project, which was a low-income energy efficiency project. I'd like to talk about the measures we used, but also some of the dynamics and relationships we saw within that program as the data came through, and the trade-offs we saw that were made. So why do we care? Well, it's a physiological need to be thermally comfortable. And without it, we're in thermal stress. And generally here, and in many other parts of Australia, it takes energy to create indoor thermal comfort. This participant's just had insulation, there's a quote on the right there, and she's amazed at the difference it's made to the health of her daughter, which is really exciting. In Tassie, a significant issue for us is that our households are letting us down. The housing stock is not supporting efficient use of energy for heating and thermal comfort. One participant said it's like living in a field. So why do we study it? Well, yes, it's recognised, but we just have very little detailed data on what's going on with the thermal comfort and energy use relationships. We've now got some data on support programs, but really, understanding what the support programs are actually doing for people is important, and also the extent of the effects of thermal stress on households and the community is important to understand. So the health link is obvious, but what was really telling was that householders are totally onto this. They understand. We have so many quotes. They understand. One lady said, well, if I'm not comfy, then I'm grumpy, I get shivery, and then I throw up. So she knows this is a thing that happens in winter. So thermal stress causes health, affordability, and environmental problems, and it's closely linked with our energy use. So I'd like to just introduce the Get Bill Smart project first, which was a project that investigated how to best support energy efficiency and thermal comfort in low-income households in Tasmania, and actually in Greater Hobart. We did a thermal study as part of what we called the GBS detailed study, and we had 500 households approximately overall in the Get Bill Smart study. We took approximately 10% of them, and we had a few different approaches, so we took roughly equal groupings from each of those, and we looked in depth at these households. And so on top of the billing data and the household surveys that we did with the other participants, we also looked at house condition, we monitored temperatures, humidity and energy, and we also did longitudinal interviews, in-depth interviews. So as I said before, this is a part of the LEAP program. So we were funded by the Australian government from 2013 to 2016 to run this program. So it was a longitudinal project. And each of the 20 LEAP projects around Australia looked at a new approach that was novel to supporting energy efficiency in Australia. These are the contributors to Get Bill Smart, all fantastic organisations to work with, and I've had a thoroughly amazing time learning from all these people. So thermal comfort and energy measures that we used in GBS were fairly simple. We used a difference between inside and outside temperatures, time spent in thermally comfortable temperatures inside the house as a percentage of time between 18 and 24 degrees. So we looked at how long people spent in what is actually a recognised thermally comfortable temperature indoors. We then looked at the change in that comfort zone, and we also looked at average daily winter heating power consumption as well. And it's important to note that we actually looked at peak winter to peak winter comparisons, so a before-after comparison of 2014 winter to 2015 winter, before and after support activities were undertaken. We developed some indicators from those. I'm very happy to talk about these further. I'm just putting them up there to note that we did develop some new indicators, and Todd Haustein at SLT came up with a house heating efficiency very early on as we were preparing this project, and it's basically a ratio of the average change in temperature to average daily heating energy consumption. We also looked at comfort zone energy efficiency, which is again another ratio of the percentage of time spent in the comfort zone compared to average daily heating power consumption. So if anyone would like to speak about those further, we actually have a journal paper in draft on that as well. So the thermal comfort relationships is what I've really wanted to come and talk to you about here. We saw thermal comfort relate very clearly to indoor temperature and electricity use. So firstly, I'd like to just show you, when we broke the households in the detailed study who we'd measured the temperatures for, down into living temperature averages, we found that there was a clear correlation with energy use. Basically, people in Tasmania need energy to be comfortable in peak winter. It's black and white, not obvious to people who work in the area, but good to have some data on. But what's also very interesting is that a good 60% of the householders involved are in quintiles 3, 4 and 5, meaning they're not spending much time in the thermally comfortable space in their house. They're in the thermally comfortable space under 30% of the time. And another interesting thing is quintiles 1 and 2, Q1 and 2 rows there. We have what we see, a big jump in heating electricity needed to get a little bit of a jump in temperature. So we're seeing that as people try and increase the temperatures in their house, it's getting harder and harder. We also looked at the relationship between heater type, energy and comfort, and fairly obviously more efficient heaters gave more time in the comfort zone, but again we didn't actually have clear data on this before. And what we're seeing of course is that heat pumps work. So we've got 2 lines there with heat pumps involved, and you'll note that over to the right you have percent time in comfort zone, and the houses with heat pumps and the houses with only heat pumps come up with a higher percent time in comfort zone. And it's important to note that I think that around 50 to 60% time in comfort zone is probably a reasonable percentage to try and attain. And so we're not seeing that really at all in these low-income households. We also saw a lot of trade-offs being made, and this was part of what Get Bill Smart tried to do. We tried to look at energy and comfort, yes, and measure the outcomes in terms of energy use and thermal comfort. But we also tried to look at the trade-offs that households were making. So we actually presented the detailed study, the Get Bill Smart detailed study, with fuel gauges on the front page of each case that we studied to try and say, hey, this isn't just about energy, let's look at how these two relate. Often we saw an outcome for one but not the other. So it could be that they were more comfortable but they used more energy, or they used less energy but they were less comfortable. So it was an interesting way to do it, and it did actually prove that the trade-offs are important to acknowledge. We also did tick lists and a number of other things, so I recommend that you have a look at that if you're interested in the trade-offs. I've put up this quote. This is Cara, who was one of our cases, and she just says what a lot of households said to us, which was, I can't put the heater down anymore in winter when it's cold. I just can't keep putting jumpers on and on. In other words, look, there's a point where I have to use energy. All these little tricky, resourceful things I do, they're not enough. And we heard this over and over. So this table, I'm sorry these are a bit complicated, but it's very interesting, and I was very keen to put this up for you. What we have here is 4 different households from the group, and what I wanted to point out here was how dynamic the outcomes were when we took the measures and actually started to analyse them. And what we can see here is that Cassie and partner, who had a very efficient house, had a small footprint, and it was insulated, it was a newer house, they had reasonable heating level, it's not too horrific really, and they had very good percent time in the comfort zone at 68 and 72%. But when we look at the household heating efficiency also, we see, it's pretty efficient, as a ratio. We've got a 0.9 there and a 0.84. But when we compare that to the other 3, we start to get a telling picture about the dynamics that occur. We've got Deirdre and child, who lived in a very poor quality house, who both had asthma, and Deirdre deliberately heating to keep them healthy. We see that they're using an extraordinary amount more for a 2-person house in terms of heating energy. We're also seeing, though, that she is keeping the percent time in comfort zone up, and they were home a lot. Then we compare that to Troy, and we see Troy he was a single man in a very cold house. And what I'm seeing there is he's using comparatively the same amount as Cassie and partner, but what we're seeing there is that he is not getting any comfort out of that heating energy he's using. So I find that one pretty shocking, comparing that to Cassie and partner. Moving on to Ingrid, our absolutely most extreme case in every way, and I'd like to talk about her very briefly a bit more. Ingrid didn't use energy. She tried not to use energy, and I'll show you. I'll pursue this a little more in the next few slides. And she also didn't live in the comfort zone, basically. I think I can comfortably say that Ingrid had one of the worst cases we saw. So Ingrid lived by herself. She lived on a pension, lived in a home her husband had actually made for her a long time ago with no insulation. She was too scared to put the heaters on because there's too many costs involved. She used about $1.50 a day for her energy, and she thought that was the lowest that anyone can. Her temperatures were low. We saw her inside temperatures tracking very similarly to outside in winter, only a couple of degrees difference, and we saw very low times in percent in comfort zone. So if you look over to the right, we're seeing she's barely ever at 18 degrees even in her house. She was also a very low energy user, as she'd said from her pay-as-you-go costs, those were, the $1.50 a day. And we did see her try to increase her heating in the after to some extent, and she thought this was quite an extreme increase. She said, "I've given up on heating," and it's such a small increase. We thought this was quite a telling comment as well from Ingrid. So with all of that, we think there is a case to continue looking at housing quality and energy efficiency to limit or hopefully get rid of completely thermal stress indoors in homes, in low-income homes. And what we would like to see is a whole range of things, but critically here, there's some things that we just know work. We know that improving housing stock does help quite a bit. We know that insulation works. We know that heat pumps do actually create a more efficient heating device, or a more efficient heating device for households. But also, we need to see some minimum standards in the housing, and including rental housing, because we saw some shocking situations in homes where they had black mould, or they had, like Ingrid's house, where we were seeing temperatures track like the outdoor cold winter temperatures in Tassie. One of the things that we are actually trying to pursue at a lot of the LEAP projects have got together, and we've got together as a group called GEAR, Group of Energy Efficiency Researchers, but we also have industry members, and we're getting together to try and get our knowledge together and mix it up and try and pursue further activities in this area. So we've just had our conference actually, which I would also recommend having a look at the website for. The abstracts were great. I think they've got all the presentations up. And we also have collaborative writing underway as well, and we've been working with the ECA as well. This is just the foundations. Thank you very much. Anton's here from Sustainable Living Tasmania, and this slide just recognises everyone who's involved in the data I've presented here. Thank you very much.